Greetings YouTube, it's me, Diamond Dave, long time no see. I know I haven't uploaded any new content in about a year and a half, but given the state of the world at the moment, I'm going to cut the bollocks and get straight to the point. So obviously, because of the way things are in the world at the moment, I cannot make a new film, but I want to try and keep this channel fresh by uploading new content and keeping you entertained as best as I can. So to compensate for not being able to make any new films for now, I've come up with a new idea of a series of videos that I'm going to make called Diamond Dave Retrospectives, in which I'm going to go back at all of my work over the nearly 12 years I've been on YouTube, and each film at a time I'm going to critique, analyse and self-review all of my films from the very first ones that I uploaded back in 2008 all the way up to my more recent work back in 2018. So I'm going to try and make this new series as entertaining as I can for you. And it's going to be very interesting for me. This is a very experimental thing that I haven't tried before, and I have seen other YouTubers do it, critiquing their past work. I think they refer to it as riffing on their old videos, but basically that's what I'm going to do, and it's going to be a good it's going to be very nostalgic for me to go back and look at all of my past work and give to you, the audience, my own perception on what I think of my old films and how I did them, looking back at a very naive version of myself when I was starting back in the day, and seeing over the years how my work evolved from my very old videos all the way up to my newer videos. And hopefully by doing this it will also bring some interest and breathe new life into my ancient videos that have otherwise been completely lost in the vast obscurity of the internet. They're still there on my channel, but if you go on my homepage you'll have to scroll a long way down in order to find my first videos. So in this first episode of Diamond Dave Retrospectives, I'm going to review my very first two films that were ever uploaded onto my channel back in 2008. So these films will be The Bloody Finger and Street Hero. So just before I begin, I'll just lay out how I'm going to structure these reviews. Because I don't have a screen capture software, I'm going to be showing the films and then I'm going to pause and stop at a certain moment and either provide an audio voiceover or cut back to myself as I am now and talk about specific behind the scenes stories of how this happened, how we did this, how we did that, how the inspiration for a certain film came to me at the time, how the ideas came to me. And then at the end of the film, I'm going to do a final reflections on it, how I think it holds up now, how I personally feel about it, and tell you some interesting behind the scenes trivia and um, facts that you probably didn't know about them, just to sort of make it interesting. So here we go. Let's travel back in time to the 30th of May 2008. That's how it all started. It all starts with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. This film was actually based on an old joke I heard years prior to making it when I was in primary school, but I'll talk more about that later once the film is over. So, this was a piece of school coursework that I did for moving image. I was studying AS levels at the time. I was 17 years old, and this was my first assignment, so to speak. The teacher told us to do a 1 minute, at least 1 minute, a 1 minute experimental short film. And Christ Almighty, was this a massive learning curve for me. I learned a lot that day. My novice skills in filmmaking are very apparent in this video because I borderline had no idea what I was doing. I thought that it was just simple. Put the camera on a tripod, put it wherever you want, get the shots, and that's how it is, but it's absolutely nothing like that at all. I learned that even you had to really consider the little things about filmmaking, apart from the big obvious ones. There are the tiny details that you don't think about, such as your physical environment where you're filming. It depends on your physical environment whether you be filming inside or outside. How much physical space do you have to position yourself as the cameraman to get the shots that you want? For example, if you want to get a wide shot like that one there, which shows the guy lying on his bed and getting up, that was very, very difficult to do, to get done, because I had to be aware of the physical space. How far could I go back to get the shots the way it was? Also, simultaneously having to put into consideration the zooming effects on the camera. How far could I zoom out before it went out of focus? And just balancing between the physical distance of myself as the cameraman and the digital distance of the camera itself and its zooming in and out capabilities. And obviously light is a massive factor when you want to make a film, and this guy's bedroom was quite dark, so it was very tricky to do. I thought going into this that this was going to be simple due to the simplicity of this particular film, but about 5 hours later, and I'm not exaggerating it, I learned at the end of that day that I was in for quite a slightly more difficult ride than I thought in terms of wanting to pursue being a filmmaker, because it took us all afternoon to get this film made. It's only about a minute and a half long, but it literally took an entire afternoon to get made. By the end of the shooting, it was after sunset and well into the early evening. On top of everything else, I had a lot of practical work to do in terms of making the scenes, because as you can see, the guy is answering his phone and there's another disembodied voice on the end talking to him. This was my impression of Jigsaw, by the way. This was what I like to call my Jigsaw voice from the Saw franchise. I want to play a game. I know where you live. That sort of thing. So what I did was I was recording him. I both had to have the camera recording. I had my mobile phone in one hand as the camera was recording away to ring his phone for him to pick it up. And then when it cut to him having it to his face, I had a little voice recorder in my other hand in which I had pre-recorded my lines. And then whenever I started recording that shot of him having the phone to his face, I hit the play button to play back lines that I had recorded prior to doing this. In those days, I didn't know about post-production voice recording, so in hindsight, I could have made things much easier for myself by just putting the voice in afterwards whenever I was editing it on my editing software, but you live and learn. Those feet were mine, by the way. So this was Kieran dressed up in my costume. Because there were only two of us there, we had to juggle between who was going to be the cameraman and who was going to be flocked up in costume. And this was another learning curve for me. Just a heads up, if you want to make a film that has only two characters in it, always have an additional third extra guy to be able to man the camera, because it makes things a whole lot easier, because we had to waste a lot of time between me getting changed out of the costume and being the cameraman and then putting the costume on Kieran to double as me and vice versa. So that took up a lot of time. So you'll find throughout this film that there'll be certain shots of the cloaked figure walking, and it's either Kieran or myself, depending on what type of shot was required. Additionally, because it was only two of us, and we didn't have an extra third guy to be a cameraman, this also meant that me and Kieran could not share the same shots together, and that would obviously further constrict what you could do if you want to make a two-cast film. Fortunately, in this scenario, we didn't really need to share on-screen time together, so it just about worked out in the end. So this is a point of view shot of me, and Kieran retreating back to his bed, and there's a very old Nokia there. Back to the old trick of using my voice recorder. As you can see, light was becoming a massive issue here, a lesson that I would learn later on. This is me in full costume, Ghostface. Kieran readying his pole to attack to defend himself. I like that shot there, I think that's reasonably atmospheric. Just the doorknob from a high angle. Really bad lighting. So this is Kieran doubling for me again. And a bit of a continuity error. I open the door with my left hand, and in this shot it's my right hand. And here's the very first reveal of me.
Hi, sorry to bother you, mate. Can I have a plaster, please?
Well, that was that. That was the very first film I ever made, and as I said, there were a lot of lessons learned that day. I just remember how difficult it was because I had a tripod as well, just having to put the camera in the right spot to really get a good angle of something. And as I pointed out, there were only two of us there, and it just did not occur to me you need a third guy. Even if you are making a two-man video, which only has two characters, you're going to need another guy to do the camera work, because it just cuts a lot of time out. It makes things go a lot quicker. It saves having to constantly change from me being in the ghost face costume and Kieran having to be in the ghost face costume to double for me. It was just crazy. And light was so bad because as we were nearing the end of the filming, it was getting into the evening, and in hindsight, I really could have done better with that. And additionally, there wasn't a script for this film. This film didn't really need a script because there was little to no dialogue in it. Two of those lines were pre-recorded on a wee voice recorder, and there was only one live piece to camera in which I speak. Kieran doesn't have any lines at all. But I also had to direct Kieran as my fellow actor. I had to tell him how I wanted him to behave and how to respond and to react to my voice being played on the recorder. So it wasn't an intimate interaction between me and him. He had to literally sort of respond to how I wanted him to respond. I wanted him to be scared because he's getting this ominous series of phone calls from this mysterious guy threatening that he knows where he lives and he's coming to his house, etc., etc. So I had to tell him, I want you to behave like this. And he did the best he could, given how limited his role was. He did. That was the best I could ask off of him, really, considering that he didn't have much to do apart from react. So the story behind this film, the idea of it, goes way back many years before I ever made it. As I said, this was made when I was 17, during my last year at secondary school. But the inspiration for the film came from when I was about 9 or 10, when I was in primary school. So when I was in P6, I went on a school trip to a place called Casbah Towers. It's a place of interest in Northern Ireland. And it's this big house that has dorms with bunk beds and all in them. It was a residential trip. It was sort of like a weekend away for the class, just to spend a couple of days in this country retreat. And the class was divided up into the different dorms that the big house had. Just so because you couldn't cram a whole class of children in just one dorm. So one night we decided to tell each other ghost stories as children of our age would. At the time we were all just 9, 10, P6. And as we were sitting up telling each other all these different ghost stories, there was one guy who told a story about the man with the bloody finger. And basically the story is, this guy is just in his house, minding his own business, and he gets this ominous phone call from a voice sort of saying, I'm coming to your house. And the guy is understandably alarmed and confused. Why he doesn't ring the police after getting a phone call like that, I've no idea, but sort of use your imagination, really. And so later on, he gets another phone call saying, I'm right outside, I'm at your front door. Then he gets another phone call, I'm at the bottom of your stairs. He gets another phone call, I'm right outside your bedroom. And it's sort of building up to what is happening. Is this guy in danger? What is going on? And then the punchline, or the anticlimax, is basically the guy who has made those calls walks into the guy's bedroom and politely asks for a plaster because he cut his finger, hence the bloody finger. So many years later, whenever I was first studying film at the end of secondary school, I remembered that joke, and whenever the teacher said, I want you to make a 1.5 minute short film, I just thought, that joke that guy told me when I was 10 during that school trip, that could be a good foundation for a short movie. In hindsight, I don't think I adapted the joke very well because it's just not very clear, the narrative, and there's a lot of plot holes. Why doesn't he just phone the police? There's a mental person saying that he knows where I live and he's going to come to my house. I think he's going to murder me! But in fiction and things like this, you just have to suspend your belief, or whatever how that saying goes. Given that it was my very first film, I do have a personal soft spot for it. You can definitely tell I was a novice then. I was literally a beginner, and there were a lot of things at the time that I didn't know about filmmaking. It was recorded using a very old video cassette camera, which you definitely don't get these days. That camera would last me for my first 2 years on YouTube. So it served me well. So in hindsight, for what it is, it's okay. It's not bad, but it's not good either. But it was my break in. It was the very first upload to this channel, and it sort of introduced me to the World Wide Web. So that was the bloody finger. And now for Street Hero, which was my very second upload to this channel, and like the bloody finger, it was a piece of school coursework. The Bloody Finger was meant to be a 1 minute experimental film, as they called it. This Street Hero was meant to be a 5 minute film and supposed to be our main practical piece of coursework in class. And this was actually the very first proper full-fledged script I wrote, because unlike The Bloody Finger, this film has a proper story to it. Now, I love action movies. It's my favourite genre of film. I grew up watching James Bond and gangster films like Goodfellas, Scarface, all these action movies, and I always wanted to make an action movie myself. So whenever the teacher said that we were allowed to make whatever type of film we wanted, I literally leapt to the chance to have a go at making a gangster stroke action movie. And this film marks the first appearance of Big Bad Dave, who would become my sort of flagship character, so to speak. He would become a recurring character in my latter films. And it was also the first of many, many, many times in which I played the villain. And spoiler warning, me being the villain, it's not getting old anytime soon, because from Street Hero onwards over the years, I always appointed myself to play the antagonist of the film, because I love being evil. Playing the villain was so much fun, still is. So this film was recorded in January of 2008, but it wasn't uploaded until the 20th of June of that year. and there were quite a few obstacles to overcome during the making of this film, but by this time I'd already learned a bit more things and I had a bit more sense as a filmmaker to work around those things in a more constructive way. So, yeah, it was the first film that I wrote a proper script for, that I wrote characters and dialogue for, because that's what was required of it. And this was also the first of many villainous roles for me to play. So here we go, Street Hero, uploaded on the 20th of June 2008. That was the second and last time that I would ever use Aiken Vision to promote my films. Henceforth it would be Diamond Dave Productions all the way. This music here is just stock music taken from a website that the school provided for us to use for both music and sound effects.
I've got a big job for you to do, and this is your biggest job yet.
I'll be right there.
Sit down, Dan. You're my best man, Dan. Thanks to you, this town is a much safer place. But now, it's time to catch the biggest scumbag of them all. What do you know, Big Bad Dave?
He is one of the most notorious and dangerous gang boss in all Banker. He controls the largest crime syndicate and is feared throughout Northern Ireland.
Very good, Dan. He is also responsible for setting up all the criminal organizations in the county. But we're going to get him.
You can touch him. He's got loads of henchmen and he covers his ass up good.
My contacts have been collecting evidence over the years and getting enough dirt in Big Bad Dave to send his slimy scum hide straight to jail for the rest of his life. We just need you to crash in on his latest scheme and catch him.
Okie dokie, that scene was supposed to be an office. So basically, if you get the plot, my friend Dan is playing a street cop who's being summoned by his boss to give him a briefing of his assignment to interfere with the illegal activities of a gangster called Big Bad Dave. And that was actually an interview room in the school that I attended, that we, through the use of turning off the main light and putting a wee table and a couple of seats and a table lamp, we tried to simulate it like a sort of shady detective's office. I don't know how it comes across, how convincing that comes across, but that was the intention. The actor who plays Dan's boss just decided to use an American accent, and I didn't really mind him doing it as long as he spoke his lines of dialogue clearly. That's all I required of him. He could do it in any accent he wanted. Really, it didn't matter, just as long as he told the story. Now, I wrote a lot of dialogue for this film, especially for this particular scene, because you have to realise when you're making a film under academic circumstances, say for example you have to do it as an assignment, compared to doing a film in your own free time, there are a lot of constraints and limitations as to what you can do in terms of your film. You're not allowed to swear, you're not allowed to smoke cigarettes and all these other rules. But the biggest constraint in working under academic circumstances is the time limit. We were only given a set number of weeks to get our films made and prepared for the end of year evaluation. So, keeping in mind all of these constraints and limitations that we had, there was only so many things that I could do with this film. So in order to compensate for the lack of resources to do more full-fledged action sequences that I would have wanted to do, I wrote a lot of dialogue to compensates for that to really try and build up the story, because I take dialogue very seriously. Whenever I show my films at a social or public event, the first thing I ask the people who I show my film to after it's over, I ask them, could you make out the dialogue? Because dialogue is very, very important. I think that goes without saying. You don't need to be an expert to know that. But I really, really wanted to get the story across as to who my friend Danny was playing. What character was he? He's a streets cop. He fights crime, and this guy is his boss who sends him out to stop crimes. He's basically a law enforcer for hire, and he gets paid to stop them. Now, in regards to because I wanted to build Big Bad Dave up as well, because I was a very unintimidating 17-year-old specky little git who was just wearing a long charcoal trench coat and a black necktie on top of my school uniform. And so the character of Big Bad Dave was sort of limited as well, because I was still on my feet as a performer, trying to figure out how to perform as different characters, and this was the first time I portrayed a proper character who has lines to say and a personality to flesh out. And so I wanted to really set the story up of this is a typical good and evil scenario, a hero versus a villain, sort of cowboys and Indians kind of thing. So this dialogue between the boss and the cop is to really build up Big Bad Dave as this really intimidating and dangerous presence. He's a powerful crime boss. He's an unrepentant psychopath, and he just commits crimes for his own amusement, and he is supposed to be the big bad of the criminal underworld, hence the name Big Bad Dave. So in the conversation these two have, they sort of flesh out Big Bad Dave without Big Bad Dave actually having to be present during this scene. So the dialogue in this scene is probably the most important in the film, because it builds up the villain, it gives you a reason to be engaged in the story, and it make, at least in my perspective, it makes you want to see what happens next and who Big Bad Dave is, what is he trying to do, and how is Dan, this cop, going to stop him. Okay, so the scene sets it up for the middle act and the final act, because in the scene following from this one we are introduced to Big Bad Dave. So after all the things we hear about him in this scene, we know what's going on. And obviously, as I said, because we were working under such on such limited conditions, quite stressful limited conditions as well, because the teacher kept badgering us that we had to get our films done, not only recorded, but fully edited as well in post-production and completed, all within a matter of weeks. So we were all under a bit of pressure. And if I had it my way and had the time to do it, I would have had Big Bad Dave as a much stronger and more intimidating on-screen presence, something which several videos later on and a couple of years later I do make up for that when I give him a remake. But in this one, yeah, because I'm only seen doing a limited amount of things in this film as Big Bad Dave, and I only have 2 henchmen in this, otherwise I would have had much more henchmen to make me a more bigger, powerful presence as the villain. But the purpose of this dialogue scene is to set up smoke and mirrors, basically smoke and mirrors, just to help get round the fact that we were 17-year-olds working in very limited conditions in a school environment to get our films done by the end of the year. So this dialogue serves to build up the story and just for smoke and mirrors to go round, sort of try and obscure the constraints that we had. I'm going to skip out the rest of this dialogue scene because there is a little bit left going on, so I'm just going to skip ahead of it to Big Bad Dave's introduction for timing purposes. Basically, the plot is my character, Big Bad Dave, has been systematically planting drugs into the food supply of the school's canteen, lacing the food with drugs in order to turn the school students into a bunch of crackheads. A very odd, weird, simplistic plot, but it was the best I could come up with given the circumstances, so here, let's continue.
Alright, gentlemen, let's get this truck shifted. I am using this will be almost teenagers running around town high on drugs. Dave, you got to jail. You really want to die, don't you? Well, I shall be more than happy to oblige. Boys, shut up!
So that was the introduction of Big Bad Dave, and as the years went on and I continued playing villains in my movies, I always continued to make the entrance of the villain good, because whenever you introduce a villain into the story, it has to be big, it has to be a big scene establishing he's evil, he's doing bad things, we're rooting for him to be defeated. So I thought in this film the best way to introduce Big Bad Dave would to be shooting an innocent woman to death before going ahead to planting drugs into foods that was about to be fed to secondary school students. The woman who played my unfortunate victim was actually my classroom assistant at the time, and I was pleasantly surprised when she agreed to go along with it, because I just thought, given that she was a member of staff, that she wouldn't do it, but she did. She was a good sport. Now, this scene was very, very difficult to do. This was actually the third attempt over the space of a few days to get it done just right, because this was in the middle of the winter. It was January of 2008, and it was blowing up a storm. The wind was so bad. We actually did a previous version of this scene in its entirety, and I had two different guys playing my henchmen, and because of the wind, you couldn't make out any of the dialogue because the wind, the sound interference was so bad because of the wind. So this was the third and thankfully final attempt at getting it done. My line where I said, "You really want to die, don't you? Well, I shall be more than happy to oblige." I actually took that directly from a video game called Streets of Rage, which is a classic 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up game from the 1990s, and those are the exact lines that the final boss says to you before you take him on, and I just thought, I'm taking that, because it was just it's such a badass, villainous thing to say. And you will see that over the years, whenever I play villains, I do take lines and actions from villains in either films, television shows, or computer games, and I implement them into the characters that I play just because I want to act out these really cool villainous moments.
It seems the lad has some slight skill killing Shotgun Pete, but he's no match for us. Come on, we've got cornered like a little rat. Where did he go? Hey!
Yes, I beg your pardon for not having any special effects when we're firing our guns, but again, it was just another constraint. I just didn't have the time or the knowledge to insert special After Effects to make it look as if that the guns were actually firing something, so we had to make up for that through physical action and putting in timed sound effects just to give the illusion that we were shooting at each other. Again, like I said earlier, smoke and mirrors. Now, that scene there, even though chronologically it takes place in the middle of the film, it was actually the very last thing I ever shot for Street Hero. That was the last scene that we ever filmed. And the sequence that you're about to see coming up, where he chases me down the streets and we have our final fight scene, that was the very first thing we ever recorded, even before all the scenes that you've just seen now. So even though the scenes that you've just seen chronologically take place before the end, those were the last scenes that we filmed. It's a classic. This is something that actually was a recurring thing in my films. It was very rare that I would shoot my films in chronological sequence. This was the first of many cases that I would shoot my films out of sequence. So for Street Hero, we started at the ending and ended at the beginning. And that's one of the beauties about filmmaking. It's one of the many things I love about it. You don't have to worry about shooting your film in chronological order. You can wait until post-production to put it all together in the order that the scenes should be in order to tell the story. But when it comes to the actual recording and the shooting, doing it in chronological order is not important, and it just gives you so much freedom. Depending on the circumstances or the convenience of the situation, you can choose which scene would be easiest to start with, whether it takes place in the middle of the film, at the very end of the film, or at the beginning of the film. In the case of Street Hero, the easiest thing to shoot first was ironically the ending. So, in the transition between me firing at Dan and running away after he kills my two henchmen, and we transition into me and him running down the street, we sort of travel back in time to the very first day of shooting for Street Hero, even though chronologically it's the ending. You can use many analogies to describe filmmaking, but a good analogy that I like to use, making a film is a bit like doing a painting. Whatever it is you're painting differs like it would be whatever you're making a film about. You could be painting a landscape or a crowd of people or an object or whatever. It doesn't matter where you start as long as you get a finished product in the end. That's all that matters. You can start with the sky, you could start with the ground, you could start with the mountains, you could start with whatever thing you're painting. It could just start with a little tree or a smudge. In the end, you will get a full portrait of whatever it is you want to paint, and that can be applicable to making a film as well, because any film can start with just a simple little shot of anything, just a simple little shot. It doesn't matter in post production where that shot will end up chronologically in terms of the story. A shot is still a shot, and if the circumstances and timing demands you to having to start shooting the film at a different part of the story, well, so be it, because in the end you'll get the same result. You'll get a beginning, a middle, and an end, no matter what sequence you actually shoot it in. So I just wanted to point that out because I think that's a very important thing when it comes to making a movie. You don't have to be concerned about shooting it in chronological order. You can start from anywhere, and that's exactly what I did with this. Started at the ending and ended with the beginning. And now for the chase scene. That little effect of the camera following us like that as we were running down the street was actually achieved by my dad driving his car alongside me and me sort of running at a similar speed to the car, while my little sister was sitting in the passenger seat sticking the camera out of the open window to film us as we ran. A bit of innovation, even if I do say so myself. And this was a Sunday morning, if I remember correctly. I quite like this fight scene. The way we sort of grapple at each other and prance about, grappling like that. I sort of refer to it as violent dancing. A conflict but a dance at the same time.
I'll show you why they call me Big Bad Dave.
They don't call me Big Bad Dave for nothing. I was just trying my best to make him as intimidating as possible, even though in real life I'm not. Classic Western style standoff.
You're going downtown, Big Dave.
Damn you!
This is my town, and it's my job to rid of criminal scum like you.
Okie dokie, so before I give my final reflections on Street Hero as a film, I want to sort of clarify as to what actually happens there at the conclusion of the fight between Dan and myself, because I don't think it is made clear what actually happened, and in hindsight that was due to lack of foresight and experience on my part. I didn't get it filmed properly, and in editing it wasn't conveyed properly as to how Dan won against me. So we're firing at each other, and basically what happened was Dan shoots Big Bad Dave in the leg, and Big Bad Dave is wounded and then subsequently arrested and sent to prison. Now, given that he was shot in the leg and was still able to be dragged up onto his feet and be escorted away by foot to be arrested, I don't exactly know how he could have done that after being shot in the leg. Now, I'm definitely not an expert in gunshot wounds, but let's just say maybe it was a flesh wound, and maybe that's how he was still able to walk and be dragged up onto his feet afterwards. I probably should have improvised a little limp at the end there just to show that I was wounded. So that was Street Hero, and I'll give it's a better than Bloody Finger score, shall we say. I has a little bit more experience by then, and I actually had a proper story and script to convey. It was actually my own mother who came up with the title of the film, Street Hero. Originally, I was going to call it Gangs of Bangor. I had only recently seen Gangs of New York at the time. And the title just wasn't really snappy, so my mother actually coins the title of the film Street Hero, so my mother gets credits for that. So this was basically the premise of what was to come on my channel over the years to come. The type of films that you would expect from me, an action film about good guys versus bad guys, and me always playing the villain. In regards to my performance as Big Bad Dave, nah, I don't think it stands up very well. And I wasn't happy with how I used him in this film because he doesn't show up until halfway through and he doesn't really have much to do. And because at the time I had very little to no acting experience, I was still trying to find myself of how to portray a very intimidating villain, something which I really hope that I did improve on over the years, but that's up to you, the audience, to decide. I did give Big Bad Dave a remake a couple of years after this film was made, which we will cover in a later episode of Diamond Dave Retrospectives, so have that to look forward to. One of the big things that was quite obvious was how was Big Bad Dave able to miss a single shot when he was literally just standing about 9 feet away from Dan. Also keeping in mind that Big Bad Dave outnumbered Dan by having 2 minions to help him in the firefight. So not only did Dan manage to kill Big Bad Dave's 2 lackeys, but he managed to dodge all of Big Bad Dave's bullets and then shoot Big Bad Dave in the leg, thus defeating him. So Big Bad Dave is a very bad shot. Even though a couple of scenes earlier he was supposed to be established as the most dangerous and most powerful crime boss in all of Northern Ireland, very dangerous man. Oh dear. Big Bad Dave, the big bad shot. I'm a bit short-sighted in real life, that's why I wear glasses, so we'll just put it down to that. So that's it then for my first episode of Diamond Dave Retrospectives. I hope you enjoyed the video. Now, obviously this has been a long video, but this is a brand new experimental format that I'm trying out because we are living in very strange times indeed, and this is just a means for me to keep my channel fresh and to keep you entertained as much as possible. And I thought doing a series of videos to retroactively review my work would be a good way of sort of bridging the gap between now and whenever I can make a proper video again. So if you like what you've seen, please hit the subscribe button and subscribe to my channel, and I will try my best to keep this Diamond Dave retrospective series ongoing, and I will try to improve on how I make the videos and my presentation skills. So in the meantime, take care and be lucky.